Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm here today with Odon Lafontaine. We've got today should be a short session, but it's an introduction to some new work that Odon is doing. And we had a fantastic conversation off camera just before this, which perhaps we can reprise. But Odon, thanks for joining me, and thanks to the audience again for being here tonight. So Odon, short introduction, and then tell us what you're going to be doing tonight, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. Thank you for having me. Yeah, tonight it's about an introduction, substantial introduction to two presentation about the Quran. You see, when I wrote the Great Secret of Islam, the cornerstone of the study I made was the Quran itself. The Quran seen as an historic source. You see, there is something very odd among the academia scholars. Most of them don't use the Quran as an historic source, as historical material, because they think it is a text without context. We cannot say anything about, because we don't know about the context, but things have changed. Things have changed a lot thanks to the groundbreaking work of Edouard Marie Gallès in 2004 in his thesis. So your audience who already watched the previous videos knows a bit about my mentor, who is someone who made a synthesis of every Islamic studies that were available during his time. And what I've done with the Great Secret of Islam, with my book, it's blurred.
I just put it in front of you, in front of your body.
It's blurred and it's upside down. Or no, I won't be able to display it on screen. But what I've done with my book is update his work. He published his thesis in 2005, and so lots of stuff has happened since then. New studies, new discoveries, and I wanted to update this work in the light of all those new studies. And especially, I worked also on the Islamic studies part, and I went much further than him. He did a sort of he did a study based on a selection of verses from the Quran, whereas I did a study on the whole of the Quran. But it will be easier for your audience to understand when we get to the presentation itself. So let's jump into it. So it's about the Quran, and it's about decoding the Quran. That the name of the presentation. I want to start by addressing the odd nature of the Quran. For your audience, for all those who have read the Quran, they surely know that the Quran is very strange. It's a strange text. It's very enigmatic. There are different literary genres, different types of stories. There are prayers, there are exhortations, there are narratives. It's very, very strange. It's a collection. It's actually in a scholarly way to refer to it is that the Quran is a corpus, which means it's a collection of different texts, like the Bible, for example. But the Muslim asserts that the Quran comes from a single person, Muhammad, even though it is very, very heterogeneous. We see also that there are different narrators, for example, in the Quran. Sometimes it's it's God. God is speaking in the Quran. Sometimes it's someone who knows, but who is not God. So someone like a teacher. Sometimes it's an unknown narrator who tells stories. We also see that the Quran is a very complex in its structure. The surahs are arranged in a strange order from the biggest to the smallest. And besides, and that's the most difficult thing with the Quran is that there are some narratives and stories in the Quran, but they are all fragmented and dispersed within the whole of the text. And so it's very difficult to follow a story, to know what happens with a specific character, to know what happens to Moses or Abraham or Jesus, because the stories are interspersed within the whole text. And besides, when we look at the whole of the Quran, there are many narratives. There are stories about Joseph, Islamic prophets, and so on. But there is no clear narrative about Muhammad and his story, his own story. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know much about Muhammad. We know very, very little actually about.
So if we, sorry to interrupt. So if we remove the hadiths, if we remove the Sirah, which are much later editions, we would have very little historical information about Islam, the geography of Islam, and Muhammad.
Exactly. That's the point. There is no clear narrative. We have to rely on an external literature to have the full picture of the Islamic narrative. We cannot gather a complete story about Muhammad from the Quran only. And besides, there is absolutely no way to do so. But there are some bits, there are some fragments, and this is what the Islamic tradition did. The Islamic scholars, they took centuries to fabricate, as I explained in previous presentation on your channel, they took centuries to fabricate the circumstances of the revelation, the Asbab al-Nuzul, and the Sirah, the Hadith, who explain every verse according to this Islamic narrative. And nowadays, when a Muslim reads the Quran, he already has in mind the big story, the big Islamic picture. He knows that Muhammad is a prophet. He knows he was born in Mecca. He knows he went to Medina and so on. And he reads the Quran with this Islamic lens, and he doesn't read the Quran for what it is actually written in it, literally written. He read it when he reads it. Most Muslims don't read the Quran at all, and most Muslims don't even speak Arabic.
What do scholars? I know that the people that you know, like the Inara group and those related to it, they question the narrative, and they will say that the narrative must have been created in a different manner. But why do mainstream scholars, even though they have all the pieces, fail to connect those dots and make a definitive statement?
This is a tough question, because there might be different reasons. Some of them have an interest in defending the Islamic narrative. Might be because they get money from Qatar or from the Emirates, or I don't know. Some of them. Others might have an ideological interest in defending Islam. This is something else, because they are anti-racist, for example, or pro-Muslim because they are because of various ideological reasons. Others have already built a career, and they don't want to jeopardize this career by opening to new ideas, new theories, new hypotheses that completely destroy the Islamic narrative. Some of them don't understand at all. I have been very amazed by the absence of a scientific mind with some scholars. I thought academia scholars were scientists. who abided by logic and reason, and a bit like me. But some of them actually don't have any scientific background at all. They have done philosophy studies or historical studies without working on their logic, on the scientific, with the scientific method and so on. And at last, there are some scholars who understand what's at stake, understand the new discoveries, and who attempt to unravel and discover what early Islam actually was. Someone like Robert Kerr, for example, is very, very proficient. Someone like Stephen Shoemaker also, even though he doesn't go all the way, he's still a bit hindered, or he stays a bit behind. Someone like Robert Kerr is very, 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 very interesting. And there is someone else I would like to quote. I don't remember whether I quoted her already in a previous presentation. She's I strongly recommend this presentation to your audience. I was there attending this conference. I knew Robert. He's a friend, and they will see lots of stuff. He's very, very funny guy also. And for the readers of my book, they will recognize that most of what he says is already in my book. Thanks to him. He proofread the French edition of my book.
I'll drop this link in the chat. So he speaks multiple languages. He's skilled at language.
His first diplomas and his formation was that of a linguist. He learned about the ancient Semitic languages, about Punic also, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, of course. And this is how he took an interest into Islam. Actually, as I have already told you, I'm the head of a French organization dedicated to the study of the origins of Christianity, a French organization. Cool. And we already had Robert several times doing some presentation for us. And in one of them, he explained his cursus, how he came from a military background, because at first he was in the Canadian special forces, to university. Wow. And to becoming an Islamologist, and being the director of the Inara Institute in Germany. But I wanted to quote Patricia Crony also. Lloyd, I don't remember whether I already quoted her on your channel. This is my book. No, this is my website. This is me, obviously. Yeah. And you just have to look at the ECHO webpage. There is a YouTube channel also.
Out page.
But you just have to look for Google Robert Kerr, or type Robert Kerr in the YouTube search bar, and you will find the presentation I was talking about. Okay. But let me go back to Patricia Crony. I don't know how to say her name in English. I know in French we say Kron. Is it Kron?
We would say Kron as well. In English, it would be Kron. Or if you use the German, Krone. Krone. We would say Kron in English.
It was Danish. Supposed to be a bit like German. So let's
maybe
say Krone.
Krone.
Patricia Crony. In her work, she died in 2014. But in 2010, she wrote that something very, very, very fundamental, essential for the Islamic studies and the Quranic studies. She wrote that we have to start by understanding the Quran on the basis of information supplied by the book itself, as opposed to that of later readers, and to understand this information in the light of developments known to have preceded its formation rather than those engendered by the book itself. This is very important because most scholars, and especially Islamic scholars, this is what I already said, they try to understand the Quran and to study the Quran in the light of later external sources, mainly from the Islamic narrative. And what Patricia Krohn told us is that this is not the way to do historical studies. You cannot understand something based on the later comprehension of the text. You have to rely on the text itself. This is also what exegetes do. The clerics or scholars who do exegesis. Exegesis is looking at the text. For example, I don't know, the Gospel of Mark. You look at the text and you pinpoint key thematics, key words, and you look into the text for every mention, every occurrence of the word. For example, bread, lehem in Aramaic or Hebrew, and you try to understand what the word actually means within the context of all its mentions, all its occurrences. This is what Christian or Jewish clerics do on the Bible, and this is what we have to do on the Quran. This is what Patricia Krohn was referring to. This is what Murad did for his translation. And this is what I did for my Quranic studies. So based on Edouard Marie Gallet's work, and what I did is actually I worked with him. He was himself relying on a tradition of Eastern Christian scholars who were very proficient in Arabic because it was their mother tongue, and also in Aramaic. People like Christophe Luxembourg or Antoine Moussali, and people before them who, because they were not Muslims, they were able to read the Quran without the Islamic lens, the Islamic narrative in mind. They were able to understand the literal meaning of the text. They were able to understand that when you find Rasul means apostle. The Arabic Rasul means apostle, someone that has been sent. It doesn't automatically means Muhammad. Whereas for a Muslim, when he sees Rasul, Muhammad Rasulullah, automatically he will think of Muhammad. And when you look at the word Rasul without the Muhammad notion in mind, you can find different meanings. A Rasul might be someone who has been sent by a master to do a task. He might be a biblical prophet. It might be Jesus, for example. And it gives other explanation for the text. And so I updated his work. This is what you can find within the Great Secret of Islam. I already did some presentation of this huge work. It was on Jay Smith's channel. The name is Thunder Films, I guess.
Yeah.
If you look at my website, you will find an article called The Nazarene Reading of the Quran, which references every presentation I made with Jay, every video, and there is a very big PDF file of all my presentation, more than 100 slides. And besides, I am working also on an academia article to put all of this research in a scientific fashion so that fellow scholars can enjoy it. And
if you can send me the link to your site and the article that you just referred to, the PDFs and so on. Send me that. I will
You have
pin that in
go
the
to the
comments
great,
later.
go to the greatsecretofislam.com and you just have to scroll. I think it's the last article. Maybe I can put it in the chat. I cannot do anything in the chat. Sending messages is only supported for hosts. I am not the host. Enjoy the stream.
You may have to do it via YouTube then.
Just scroll to the, I think it's the last article. Scroll down. Scroll a bit up. Excuse me, you went too fast.
Sorry.
Scroll up. It's not an introduction.
A Nazarene reading.
Scroll up a bit. Scroll up, you will get to the title of the article. So you have 4 parts here. A Nazarene reading of the Quran. And if you click on the black button, you will get the PDF file of the presentation I made.
Okay, I just dropped that link in the chat so everyone can view that. So we can just type it in the comments later and I'll pin it as a pinned comment. So just add this info and then I'll pin this.
Okay. Yeah. So I was talking about the new Quranic studies I propose in my book. So it's based on the global reading of the Quran. Like I explained, it's an exegesis in the right sense, the right meaning of the word exegesis. And I focused on key words, key expressions to understand what the Quran literally says.
Right.
And because of this, we can use, thanks to this, we can use the Quran as an historical source, especially so that we have now, especially since it has been 20 years since Dr. Edouard Marie-Galès released this work, we have a lot of new studies to better understand the context of the Quran. We have studies about the actual historical context of the 7th century, so the war between Byzantium and Persia, the various Arab factions who had been Christianized, evangelized, and some of them were allied with Persia, some with Byzantium, some were going rogue. We have studies about the many influences from Ethiopia, from Mesopotamia and Persia. We have stories about the eschatological mindset of the time, the fact that people, not only within the early Islam movement, but also within Christian and Jews were thinking that the end of times was approaching.
Yeah.
And we also have new studies about the editing process of the Quran. We have found manuscripts, ancient manuscripts. There are some top-notch scholars like Guillaume D, who have been working on the editing process of the Quran, and who have put forth some groundbreaking discoveries. I'm also thinking about Edouard Marie-Galès, who published an article about the Muhammad mentions in the Quranic text a few years ago. It was already in his thesis in 2004, but he made it into an article that was published by INARA, and he also gave a lecture during an INARA conference. And you can find the English version of the article on his academia webpage, academia.edu. And he proved that every Muhammad mention and Ahmad mention, so those 5 mentions are interpolations, which means they were not in the original text or texts. They were added at a moment, and it it raises questions. It means that at the moment, some Islamic scholars had the need, were sort of forced or compelled to add Muhammad, the name Muhammad, in the text. It means, it could mean that Muhammad, since he was not mentioned at the origins, Muhammad as an Islamic prophet, as the prophet of Islam, is a late invention. It doesn't mean there were no Muhammad people in the 7th century, but it means that as an Islamic prophet, there was no prophet of Islam, actually. That's the thing. And we can understand this thanks to Quranic studies. And these Quranic studies allow us to engage the Islamic narrative. We can better understand how it was fabricated in relation to the Quran. We also can engage this narrative by asking the question, does the Quran actually support the Islamic narrative? When you look at this narrative, it is a huge narrative. There are hundreds of thousands and millions of pages of stories supposedly derived from the Quran, or quoting the Quran.
Yeah, but where do they get the details from, and why are those details not in the Quran?
That's the thing. The details are supposed to come from a so-called oral tradition, but for almost all of them, we know they were invented or distorted. Because you see, with the oral tradition, it's very hard to invent something out of the blue, because there are always people who remember something else. So the best way to invent story is to distort existing stories, existing memories. For example, something happened during the life of a person in the 7th century that was nicknamed Muhammad. It did not happen in Mecca, and this person was not the prophet of Islam. It was something else. He just had the nickname Muhammad, or Mahmat, as it was pronounced at the time. But the story has been written and rewritten as a hadith, and then as a later hadith, and so on. And it became the story of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam in Mecca. And so it sort of Islamicized the story. And it distorted the memory into something that was useful for the fabrication of the Islamic narrative. This is how it was done.
James Lindsay always says that the best lie is always mixed with a little bit of truth. And he says that all of these lies told by all of these cults and groups that he discusses are always a simulacrum of the truth. And Islam, I think, fits that.
You have to mix truth with lies in order for the lies to get accepted. But what I want to do now is to present two angles of the Islamic narrative that are supposedly derived from the Quran itself, as the Islamic scholars tells us. And we will see in the further presentation how we can completely unbuild or we can completely destroy this narrative and see that the literal text of the Quran tells another story. And this story, this other story, I think it's an historical story. It can be used as an historical source with scientific method and all the critique that is needed, of course. It can be used to rebuild the story of the actual historical story of early Islam. So let me just share my screen, if I can, for just a slide.
Yeah, in the middle it shows share. Yes, there you go.
Do you see my presentation here?
There it is.
You see the diagram.
It's on screen.
So according to the standard Islamic narrative, the Quran tells us about the protagonists of Islam, of early Islam, of Islam. It tells us about Muhammad, it tells us about his early followers, it tells us about his opponents, it tells us about the whole story, actually. It's supposed to tell us. But in order to understand the story, you have to also rely on external sources. But we have to rely on the circumstances of the revelation, as I already told you, Lloyd. The thing is, what are the protagonists of Islam according to the Islamic narrative, according to what the Islamic narrative makes out of the Quran? There are the Muslims, of course. They are supposed to be the first believers. So mostly in the Quran, they are called mu'minun, believers. We can find the word Muslim in Arabic, Muslim. But there are very few occurrences of the word. Mostly it's mu'minun. And literally, when we read the verses with Muslim mentions, it's not about with Muslim in Arabic Muslim mention. It's not about Muslims, but it's mostly about people who have submitted to something. So in the context of the verse, it doesn't mean Muslim. We also find other categories of believers, such as the Muhajirun, the people who did the Hijrah, who went from Mecca to Medina with the Prophet. We find the Ansar, for example. The Ansar are the auxiliaries, the people who joined the Prophet after the Hijrah, mostly in Medina. And those people, the Muslims, are supposed to, there are other people, of course. Let me get to the other people. The other people that are mentioned in the text, they are the Christians, called the Nasara, the Nazarenes. Yeah. Literally, it means Nazarenes. It doesn't mean Christian, but they are supposed to be Christians according to the narrative.
So there were different groups of the Nazarenes, because apparently the word referred to different groups. So it doesn't necessarily refer to a single group, but it was used here to refer to, so you have to be very specific about which group it is referring to.
So here we are looking at things according to the Islamic narrative. So according to the Islamic narrative, all Christians are Nazarenes, are Nasara.
Okay.
So we are not talking here about the reality, about actual historical reality. We will see afterwards that Nasara means something else, and that there were many different types of Nazarenes.
Right. Yeah. The wooliness of the terms makes it confusing for us. On the term mu'minin that they utilize there, that is basically a derivative of the Jewish or Hebrew ha-menim, but the ha-menim in this case refers to heretics. So these Muslims basically took on the title heretics.
No, mu'minun. I get your point, but it's not the same construction as in Hebrew. Mu'minun is those who have given their faith, their allegiance. It's the same root. It's amin, the same root as in amin, or the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also the same root, the same Semitic root that we find in minim.
Yeah, when you look at menin, you have mu as a prefix and ha as a prefix. You're left with the menin.
Ha minim are the heretics, the one who don't have the right faith. And in the Hebrew conception in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, it mostly referred to Jews who had become Christians, or at least Jews who had recognized Jesus as the Messiah. But for those, there was the specific term, Notzrim, which is the exact same word as Nasara. But this is a story for another presentation. This is I just want to delve into the Islamic narrative here and see that there are different categories, different protagonists within the Quran that the Islamic narrative has taken on and redefined. It has defined Muslims, it has defined Christians as being the Nasara in the Quranic text. It has defined the Jews as being the Yahud or the Banu Israel, the sons of Israel. Actually, Yahud does not mean Jew. Jew is a word from the Middle Ages. The actual word, the actual literal translation would be Judeans or Judean. But it has become a synonym of Jews in the Middle Ages in the West. There are also the mushrikun. The mushrikun are supposed to be associators. They are the one who do the shirk. Shirk, the sin of giving associates to God. And they are supposed to be, according to the Islamic narrative, they are supposed to be pagans, polytheists who worshipped stones or mountains or statues. And because of this, there were seen by monotheistic believers as associators. And by extension, the word mushrikun also came within the Islamic narrative to refer to Christians. But the first meaning within the Islamic narrative of mushrikun is pagan, associator, associationist.
What is interesting about that is that Christians are people of the book who are by definition not pagan, yet they're mushrikun who are pagans. And then also Muslims are not allowed to marry pagan women, yet they can marry Christian women. These are contradictions. And Muslims are just...
I want to address them. And I will address them in this very presentation. So those are supposed to be the main protagonists of the origins of Islam according to the Islamic narrative. And there are other categories. There is the Ummah, the Muslim Ummah, who is the communities that God has charged Muhammad to develop. It's God's chosen community, so it is led by Muhammad, and it is the community of the Muslims. There is another community, a very strange community, which is that of the people of the book, Al-Kitab. Al-Kitab is a very strange expression according to the Islamic narrative because it's supposed to encompass Muslims, Christians, and Jews. According to the Islamic narrative, they are all people of the book or people of the scripture because their religion are based on scriptures. They have been given scriptures by God. So the Tanakh for the Jews, the Old Testament, and the New Testament for the Christians. Basically, let's say the Bible. The Bible is supposed to be the scripture. And the Quran is seen also as a God-given scripture, which makes the people of the book encompassing Muslims, Christians, and Jews. And there is another very important category. They are the infidels, the non-Muslims, actually, the kuffar. The kuffar are all people that are non-Muslims. So the Nazarenes, the Nasara, the Christians, the Jews, and the pagans, according to the Islamic narrative. And with this framework in mind, the Islamic narrative develops stories outside of the Quran to explain the Quran. When we see Yahud in a verse, in a Quranic verse, and Al-Kitab, people of the book, in a Quranic verse, the Islamic scholars rely on this to develop stories and expand the Islamic narrative. So these categories are very important for the coherence of the Islamic narrative and the understanding of Islam for every Muslim, actually.
I'm just curious in that they regard these Sabaeans, or the Sabians rather, as a people of the book, and yet we know the Sabians are Gnostics, they're pagans, and they're certainly not Christians. So,
exactly.
Islam makes all of these contradictions.
This is what I want to address now, because this explanation given by the Islamic narrative for the Quran, actually, explaining us that the Quran tells us about Muslims, Christians, Jews, pagans, and so on. This explanation is full of incoherences. It doesn't work, actually. It doesn't work when we look at the text for what it literally means, which tells us something about the fabrication of the Islamic narrative. The Islamic narrative is loosely based on the Quran, but mostly it distorts the literal meaning of the verses to make them fit into an external narrative. And how do we see? How do we get to this conclusion? Because there are many incoherences within this narrative. For example, the believers, supposedly the Muslims, don't belong to the people of the book. When you look at every occurrence of the mentioned people of the book, I've done the job. There are many, there are something, I think, 36 occurrences of the expression, 32 occurrences of al-kitab. And there are, in my, according to my work, 46 other occurrences, at least, of the word kitab meaning book or scripture or writing. There are 46 other occurrences of the word kitab in which the word is used to define a community or a group of people according to the use of the book, the use of the scripture. But there are many other occurrences of the kitab word. There are other meanings to the kitab words than al-kitab or a community with a sacred scripture. There is just the meaning book, for example, or the book of life. Every Muslim is supposed to have a book in which angels write the good and the bad deeds. And we find this word often in the Quran to refer to this very specific book of life or book of sins, book of deeds. Let's call it this way. But when we look at the literal text, and it's really easy to do, actually, just have to look, for example, in my presentation on the Nazarene reading of the Quran on my website, where I put forth every occurrences of the al-kitab, you come to realize a very strange thing is that the believers, so the Muslims, according to the Islamic narrative, are never included. They are never included when the al-kitab are mentioned. They always
So
appear
the
as a
Muslims are
separate
not
group.
a people of the book.
So there is always, for example, like you say, oh, people of the book, someone addressing the people of the book. But this very person addressing the people of the book, according to the Islamic narrative, it could be Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. He always says you, he never says we.
Okay,
you get my point. It's very strange. It's always...
So these people of the new book, the Quran, don't have a book, and they're not people of the book, and they're talking to other people who are people of the book. That Muslims are supposed to be people of the book. You know, they also now have their book. So that goes against the narrative.
They're supposed to form a sort of community, not a community, but they share something with the others. They should share something with Christians and Jews. But in the literal text, we always see that Christians and Jews, other people of the book, are always called as a separate group. For example, if you look at Surah 74, verse 31, it's a very long verse, but in the middle, it talks about those to whom the book has been brought and those who believe. So you see here we have two categories, whereas the Islamic narrative says that those to whom the book has been brought should include the believers.
That's correct.
So why does you see that the literal text makes a distinction between the believers and the people of the book?
Those to whom the scripture hath been given, and that believers.
Let me see. Let me have a look at your screen.
Let me just zoom in a bit.
That those to whom the scripture has been given and believers. You see? Why is there a need to add and believers?
Because they see themselves separately as the believers. I mean, the name
At the
the
same-
believers was part of
And
their
the
title
believers
for a long
see
time.
themselves separately as the people of the book. So they don't belong to them. But it's not this only occurrences. There are almost every occurrence of the expression al-kitab, people of the book, is strange. It's not logical. It's not logical. Right. The Islamic explanation is that the Muslim are people of the book, but it doesn't make sense with the literal text. And even when it should make sense with them, because the believers are supposed to be the best community, the best of the communities that God created for in mankind. So they are the best believers among all the Christian and Jews. The Muslims are supposed to be the best. But the text also points at other communities within the people of the book who are not part of the Muslims, who are not believers, and who are the best. It's very, very strange. And besides, there is a sort of very harsh condemnation within the Quran toward the people of the book. Almost all of them are said to be bad, perverts, unjust. If you look at Surah 3, verse 110, if the people of the book believed it will be better for them, there are some who have faith, but most of them are perverse. So Christians and Jews are supposed to be perverts, and the very few who have faith, according to the Islamic narrative, they should be Muslims. But we have seen elsewhere that Muslims are not part of the people of the book.
So who are they then, if they're not? Because by implication, they are.
But let's just you will see where I want to go. There is another verse who says, it's in Surah 29, verse 46, discuss only in the best way with the people of the book, except with those who are unjust. Which means also that the one who is commanded to discuss with the people of the book does not belong to the people of the book. Otherwise, the narrator or God would have said something to connect the one he commands to the people of the book. And so we see here that within the people of the book, there are two categories. There are those who are unjust, and those, a very small group, who have faith. But most of them are perverts. This is what the literal text means. If we look deeper, we see that Christians, Trinitarian Christians, also don't belong to the people of the book. Christians are supposed to be Nazarenes, but there are also mushrikun, Trinitarian Christians, believe that Jesus is God or God is Jesus. And they commit shirk. They are mushrikun. So every Christian is, all Christians are mushrikun. And because of this, they don't belong to the people of the book, because the text says that the people of the book do not include mushrikun. Let me explain. This is what you already hinted at, Lloyd. In Surah 24, verse 3, we have a commandment about marriage. The adulterous man shall marry no one but an adulterous woman or a mushrikat, an associator woman. so supposed to be a pagan, but mushrikat are also a Christian woman. And the adulterous woman, no one shall marry her but an adulterous man or an associator man, a mushrikun, a Christian. So supposedly a pagan, but also a Christian. That is forbidden to the believers. And in another verse, in fifth verse of Surah 5, we have this commandment: permitted to you are the virtuous woman among the believers and the virtuous woman among those who have been given the book before you. It means when you look at these two verses and you do logical connections, it can only mean one thing, is that the mushrikun are not part of the people of the book. Otherwise, there could not be a commandment to marry virtuous women from the people of the book. And so when we look at the category people of the book, we have seen that the believers don't belong to the people of the book. The Christians don't belong to the people of the book, according to the literal text of the Quran.
Mhm.
What's left? What's left within the people of the book? Only the Jews. So mostly people of the book, according to the literal text of the Quran, are Jews. And when you look at every mention, every occurrence of the people of the book, apart maybe from one, and every occurrence of the word kitab, in which it defines a community in relation to the use of the sacred scriptures, we can see that it applies to Jews. And so we have something here that is very, very, very interesting. The people of the book are Jews, and mostly only Jews, which completely changes the meaning of the Quran. Actually, it completely breaks down the Islamic narrative, and it gives a new meaning to the Quran. When you read the Quran with this in mind, it changes things. It changes the stories. It changes a lot of things. It also makes us understand that the Nasara, supposedly Christians, they are said to be people of the book within the Quranic text. So we get to understand that the Nasara are not Christians, but Jews. They are part of they are a Jewish community. They are a Jewish community because they are part of the people of the book, and the Quran literally defines the people of the book as being Jews. So the Nasara from the Quran are not Christians, but Jews, a very specific kind of Jews. So what are they exactly? That's one of the main issues. This is what I explain in my book.
But which geography are they referring to? Are they referring to Southern Arabia? Are they referring to Judea? Where are these particular Jews? Because are these Orthodox? Are these heterodox? Are these, some stripe in the middle?
We don't know exactly. We don't know exactly, but we can get from the Quran. Well, we can know for sure with external studies. I know, but I won't answer it because I want just to stay focused on what the Quran says. But within the Quran, we can see that some of the Nazarenes seems to be close to the believer, close in faith and close geographically speaking. So there were some where the believers were, but the thing is, where the believers were they actually? Were they in Mecca? Were they in Medina? Or were they elsewhere? This is another point I want to address in this presentation. But let me just conclude this point on the protagonists by talking about what we also find in the Quran. There are many verses about the people of the book who condemn most of them because they are perverts. And by contrast, they also highlight the existence of a small community among the Jews, among the people of the book, that has faith, that is not pervert, that is not unjust. And there are verses that define this small community, this small group among the Jews. So we can see in these verses, and I will look into more details in another presentation, that they abided by Moses' law, that they recognized Jesus as the Messiah of Israel, and hence they were opposed to the rabbinic Jews who did not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. We see also that this very small group, defined by the Quran, by the literal reading of the Quran, condemned the Christian idea of Jesus' divinity. So they were also opposed to Christians. And we also see that they believed that the end of time was imminent. And so my hypothesis here, building on Édouard-Marie Gallet's work, who is the one who discovered this, is that this very small group among the Jews, the good Jews, are the Nazarenes. They are the Nasara in the Quran. And this is something very, very important for the understanding of early Islam. And for example, when we look at the whole of the Quran, we see that there's something Jewish in it. But it's very hard to pinpoint exactly what community or what teaching would have come from Judaism directly. Some verses are explicit, but mostly it's about stories about Moses that we find in the Jewish tradition, stories about Joseph, about Jonas, about apocryphal stories about the Bible and about Jesus. And we also see religious teachings that seems to be inspired by Judaism, but they are not clearly Judaism. For example, everything that pertains to food, so not eating carrion, not eating pork, it seems to be derived from the kosher laws, but it's not exactly this. But we see this in the Quran. There is something of a Jewish teaching to the Christian Arabs, to the audience of the prophet, let's call him this way. And we can then assume or form the hypothesis that some of the Nazarenes that are described in the Quran had a part in this teaching. What part? That's the thing I discuss in my book.
Could these potentially have been Sadducees, as someone asked, or a known grouping from the Bible, or do these seem to be sort of a heterodox, a breakaway sect? What about the groups like the Karaites, as some have hinted at?
There is something about the Karaites, I agree. But you see, we can assume that the bulk of the Quranic text comes from the 7th century up to the 630s, maybe. There was some interpolation and maybe some texts were added thereafter. But most of it still nonetheless comes from the early events of Islam, from the 600s, 610s, 620s, 630s. And you see, we are here 500 years after maybe more, after the latest text of the Bible. So it's very hard to refer to the Bible to explain what happened 500 years later. The Sadducees, we don't know much about them. The only thing we know is thanks to the Gospels and a very tiny bit in the Jewish tradition. That they kind of disappeared after the destruction of Jerusalem's temple in the 1st century. And there is nothing to make a connection between them and the Nazarenes. But we have evidence for other connections.
Right.
Beginning with the name Nazarene.
Someone asked a question about Ethiopia. They mentioned that, I mean, the very first hijrah was before Medina was to Ethiopia, which was a Christian
According
country.
to the Islamic narrative.
True. And however, when you look at the Quran, you look at the languages that comprise the Quran, and this was by Jeffrey who did this analysis. So this is 1936. It's slightly 38. It's slightly out of date. I mean, even I found a few additional words, and we can expand upon this now. But
this is
when
what
people
Robert Kurtz does.
Yeah, when we speak of the Quran, many people speak of like Nabatean, Petra. But if you look at the number of Nabatean words, you're looking at 17, right? And you can add Coptic to that. Let's say you combine these two, Coptic and Nabatean. Now you're looking at a total of 27 words for that northern influence, northwestern influence, that Egyptian/Nabatean influence on the structure of the Quran, on the language of the Quran. But when you look at Ethiopic, there's, if you compare that with Coptic, there's 20 times the words in the Quran, which tells us there's a much larger influence also from West Africa, which we can't just outright ignore. So you've got Syriac, Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, but this Ethiopic, there's even more Ethiopic words and terms. So words like Tawheed, which is a Christian term for the unity of Jesus with the divine and the man, right? The divine man and the and the human. That's an Ethiopic term that comes from Christianity. They spend 15 years there, apparently, and certain practices like taking your shoes off before going in, those are Ethiopic practices, going into to worship and so on. So, and there's lots of stories about the Quran being, not the Quran, the Kaaba originally being a Christian temple built in the style of the Ethiopian temples, or reconstructed in that fashion. And his first lectern was built by a Christian. His midwife who stayed with him his entire life, was a Christian woman from Ethiopia. So there's a very strong Ethiopian influence in the Quran. Just any thoughts on that, Odon?
Yeah, I've got 2 points here. The first one is you have to be very careful with this kind of studies about the foreign words, or even the studies I made about the occurrences of a key expression in the text, because the text is not homogeneous. That I think the text has been made by assembling various collections of former texts. So there might have been a faction, for example, who had connections to Ethiopia and who had texts with lots of Ethiopic influences. And these words, the words of the text of this particular faction, became mixed with the other texts. And you see, it doesn't mean that every believer had been influenced by Ethiopia. It only means that we find this in the final Quran. But how did we get to the final Quran?
But those words lead to concepts. Like if you take Tawheed, the concept derives from a term that's Ethiopic in origin, and conceptually they've taken this Christian idea, morphed it into their Muslim idea. So I mean, even an error gives you something can teach you something. Even the fabrications teach you something about their intention, or what they're trying to lead you away from, or what they're trying to lead you to, and so on.
I agree. But you also see that this chart makes a distinction, between Syriac and Aramaic, which are mostly the same language. Syriac is supposed to be the Western dialect of Aramaic, and Aramaic is supposed to be the Eastern, so the one that was spoken in Mesopotamia. And if you look at the percentage of words from Aramaic and Syriac, but let's call it Aramaic, it's more than a third of the text. It's significant.
Don't forget, this is a 1938 analysis. I mean, so this is like nearly a century out of date, but it was a basis.
Let's also just highlight a point. It's not a third of the text, it's a third of the vocabulary. It's not the same. Mostly the Quran is Arabic. It's written maybe at 90% of its content is Arabic. But its vocabulary, it's something else. If you look at the Quran, there are more than 6,000 verses. Let's assume there are, I don't know, 1,000 words, 1,000 different words in the Quran. And this tells us that 33% of those words are Aramaic. But it doesn't mean that 33% of the whole text is Aramaic. It's written in Arabic using sometimes Aramaic words and mostly using Arabic words. The Quran is mostly an Arabic text written in Arabic for Arabs. So we have to be cautious when we look at this kind of. We have to know exactly what this kind of diagrams and charts mean. And I had a second point. The second point was that if you look at the historical studies that have been made recently, they have pointed at connections between Ethiopia and some of the factions that took power in the Middle East around the 630s, 640s. For example, I don't remember his exact name, but the first emir who took over Egypt had some troops from Ethiopia with him. It's Ibn al-Amr. I don't have his exact name, but you are such a living encyclopedia, Lloyd, that
who are you thinking of?
But you see my point here. Some of the factions had close connection or closer connections with Ethiopia than others, which can explain why we find, in the end, in the collection of the text of the various Arab factions, we can find some words from Ethiopic.
No, but it seems, I mean, even if it was fabricated, one has to wonder why they would be adding these Ethiopic references with no need. You know, it's not. I mean, either they wanted to appeal to those people, or there's some level of truth to it, because there's going to be, I think, some level of truth to that. And historically, the Ethiopians, as one example, at a certain time, were dominant militarily, financially, socially, culturally in that region. And so they were, at one time, the Aksumite Empire was the fourth largest empire, fourth most powerful empire in the world, rivaling the Romans, for instance. We barely know about them, but they had strong influence in that region. They were trading with the Romans. They were trading in India.
What do you mean when you say that region?
So you're looking at Arabia, right?
Yeah,
you're looking at southern Arabia, southern and western Arabia, and also the east coast of Africa around Aksum. So the Aksumite Empire, they had very strong influence, and they were trading with Greece.
Yeah, they were influential there, I agree.
Yeah.
But is early Islam all about Arabia and Hijaz? If you look in the Quran, you find descriptions of places that cannot be in Arabia.
Sea trading and so on.
For example, the fishing. The fishing could not have happened in the Hijaz, because there is in several verses the description of places where we have fresh water and seawater that seems to be very close. So a big lake, for example, like the Lake of Galilee, which is relatively close to salt water. There are other lakes like this in Syria, but there is no such situation in Arabia. There are no big lakes where you can fish fresh fish and fresh shellfish, and
that's the Sea of Galilee,
close to the sea.
So then those could be references again to like the Sea of Galilee or to the Mediterranean, rather than necessarily Arabia.
It just tells us that the scope, the geographical scope of the Quran it's much larger, much larger than Arabia. And I want to get to this right now. I want to talk, to introduce, but I will do it quick because it's been already an hour, more than an hour. I want to introduce the other presentation I want to make about the Quran, which is about finding and uncovering the actual narrative. I told you that the Quran is an odd text. It is very difficult to get information from it. It's enigmatic, and there is no clear narrative in the Quran, but there are bits, and there are many bits and fragments. They don't form a complete story, but when you put them together, and when you look at them in relation to new historical studies about the 614 conquest of Jerusalem, for example, you get some connections. And it's very interesting because it uncovers what I think is the actual story of early Islam. And I would be talking about what is nowadays called about the Jerusalem thesis, which is the idea that the Quran doesn't talk about Mecca. It's something huge, very huge. When you look at every verse in the Quran that the Islamic tradition says, it refers to Mecca. This is the place of gathering, for example, it is Mecca.
Right.
This is the place of Abraham, it is Mecca. This is the place of the pilgrimage, it is Mecca. The place of the Kaaba, it is the Mecca. It is the place of the Masjid al-Haram, it is Mecca. When you look at every claim that the Islamic narrative makes about Mecca, it also applies to Jerusalem, which is something huge. When you think about it, it means that this text, the Quran, describes a city that could be both Jerusalem and Mecca. So is there such thing as a description, a very detailed description with places names, for example, like the Safa and Marwa hills, with the place of Abraham? Is there such thing as a description that would fit two cities, two different cities?
Here's a thought. Let's say they were trying to emulate the glory of Jerusalem, and they wanted to piggyback on that legendary status of the city. Now, let's say for instance, they came from Yemen. Right now, you look at the Dan Gibson story about Petra and about Mecca not having these characteristics that are ascribed to it in the Quran, but trees and rivers and dates and blah blah, and you find that in Petra. And I've been to Petra. And then those same descriptions also apply to Yemen. They can also be applied to Yemen. Now, what if originally? So we're saying now that this came from somewhere else, and Mecca was fabricated later. So what if they came from Yemen, which is a strong pagan culture, strong pagan background? They wanted to transplant that, but they wanted to, maybe they weren't necessarily in Jerusalem. They knew about it. They'd been there and so on. They took ideas of Jerusalem and transposed those on their pagan ideas and then created this hybrid. Because when we go further back, when you go further back,
point, but
the 7th century, you start to find a lot of pagan references and elements.
I'm sorry, Lloyd. I get your point, but for your scenario to be valid, it would need the Islamic scholars forging the text in order to fit Jerusalem. You understand this? Whereas what happened is that they read a text that was already in existence, that already existed. They read descriptions of a Kaaba. They read descriptions of Maqam Ibrahim, a place of Abraham, and they applied their own reason to this, by trying to make this mention refer to Mecca. But this mention, they already existed. In your scenario, you're imagining someone who would want to make Mecca resemble Jerusalem by changing the text. But the text already existed. We have fragments, Quranic fragments from the 7th century. Some of them talk about what is supposed to be Mecca. What is supposed to be Mecca. But you see, there is only one mention to the name Mecca in the text, and it is very, very odd, and some scholars think it doesn't mean Mecca. It means something else.
There are references in the Quran and in other texts that refer to Yemen, and some of them are very subtle, but they're there. And Muhammad states that the religion is from Yemen. The religion is Yemeni or Yemenite. He wears the mantle of the Yemenites. He wears, so these things are very important to him as well. And when you start to go into the history pre-Islamic, you start to find a very strong influence between Yemen and Ethiopia, because they conquered and controlled that region. And then you start to see references there as well, because before Christianity was present, there was paganism. So you see these pagan elements, you see some Zoroastrian elements. So, and as you mentioned, within the Quran, there's dozens of authors over centuries. So you've got all of these disparate groups trying to be represented, trying to appeal to all of them, and all of them are trying to some degree push their agenda. So it's a concoction. So this Quran is not necessarily, it's clearly not just Christian, it's clearly not just Jewish, it's clearly not just A or B or C, but it's this concoction of a number of things.
A concoction, a soup.
That's the term that 19th century scholars were using back then to describe Islam. They stated that the Quranic narrative is a concoction. That's a word that actually was in use in the 19th century.
There's another thing that we have to bear in mind. Dan Gibson, for example, didn't have this in mind. And this is one of the reasons why his ultimate scenario of Petra is wrong, in my opinion, is that this idea of a unique place of origins comes from the Islamic narrative. It doesn't exist in the text. In the text, we have references to various geographical locations. And we have influences from Ethiopia, Yemen, Syria, Mesopotamia, Greek influences, and so on. So what do we make of this? I think there was no unique place of origin for Islam. Islam is a movement that emerged ultimately in Baghdad. So should we pick a place for a unique place for its origins? It's Baghdad. This is where the story was
consolidated in Baghdad, not necessarily strictly emerged, but really consolidated itself in that.
Was there a prophet Muhammad, a prophet of Islam before the Abbasids?
I'd say there were numerous prophets. He seems to be a composite.
Maybe. So. Was there a Mecca, a pilgrimage to Mecca, for example, before the Abbasids? The Abbasids were the one who constructed the aqueducts, for example. Without the aqueducts in Mecca, the pilgrims thirst to death. They cannot make the pilgrimage.
Yeah.
So this is a very strong clue that the whole Mecca as the place of Islam's origin was invented much later during the Abbasids' time. So I will unravel the Jerusalem thesis. You might have heard already Paul Ellis talking about this. He made a strong dense file on this topic. But the first to address it was Edouard Marie-Galès in his thesis 20 years ago. And there are some of the points he highlighted are sadly not in Paul Ellis' thesis yet. We will see this. But there are other scholars who have taken an interest into this thesis. Robert Kerr, for example, or Stephen Shoemaker. He made a contribution to the last Inara book, and not the last, the one before the last, about Jerusalem being referred to in the Quran and not Mecca. and it is very, very academic.
Yeah.
What I
just want to
also
say
want
thank
to
you
address.
for the donation. That was from Hariel, I believe.
Oh.
Let me just find. I'm trying to find it. For some reason, I cannot locate it, but there it is. I think. Thank you, Hariel. Much appreciated. Very kind. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so today was just like
I've got
introduction of
two more points, three more points
Sure. Please go ahead.
to develop. If you please, Lloyd.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
How much time do I have left?
We have some time, so I mean, we've
Okay.
been going 1 hour 20 minutes, so another 10. Is that all right?
Okay.
Because
I want to address
then next
also.
week, I mean, we'll have a more fleshed out, presentation. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lloyd.
No, don't rush. Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Take a bit of time. Flesh those few points.
Okay. I have. I want to address. So in this part about the actual narrative that we can gather from the Quran, I want to address something that is, in my view, central to early Islam. It is the alliance between Abraham and Ishmael. This is something very strange. The Quran describes an alliance, a divine alliance that is being made, a covenant, a divine covenant that is being made, that would have been made in the past between the biblical figures of Abraham and Ishmael, and this covenant aimed at rebuilding the Kaaba according to the Islamic narrative, aimed at rebuilding the temple in Mecca. But when we look at the text for what it literally means, I think it pertains to the alliance between the ones who identify with Abraham, sorry, pardon my accent, namely the Nazarenes, Nasara, Judeo-Nazarenes, and the one who identify with Ishmael, namely the believers, the Arabs, with the divine mission. It is presented this way: divine mission to rebuild and purify the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And this is what actually happened. In 638, we have the sources telling us about an alliance of Jews, people who are said to be Jews by the witnesses, and Arabs who took over Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple there. This is something very, very important, religiously speaking. And it's almost absent from the Islamic narrative. In the Islamic narrative, there is a story about Umar ibn al-Khattab, coming into Jerusalem, and he has with him a convert from Judaism, so a Muslim, but who was formerly a Jew, who asked him about his permission to build an oratory on the Temple Mount. It's very, very strange, because a Jew doesn't build something like this lightly on the Temple Mount. And this is in the Islamic narrative. But we have other sources telling us about the rebuilding of the temple around 638, 640. This is something very, very important. And I just want to wrap up this narrative and this way of engaging the Islamic narrative, thanks to the literal meaning of the Quran, with this small presentation. Let me just reshare my screen. It's only a slide. So, window, share. You see it? Is it full screen? Do you see Muhammad's story?
Yeah.
Okay. When you look at the Quran, according to the Asbab al-Nuzul, the circumstances of the revelation and the Islamic narrative, there is some Muhammad story who is supposed to be depicted, fragments of it in the Quran, bits of it. So it's all mixed within the Quran, but there is something here. And the story, you know it. It's the Islamic narrative. He was living in Mecca, and in 610 he had the first revelation. Mecca is supposed to be a polytheist city in the Hijaz, so a city ruled by associationists, people who believe that there are gods beside God. It was the city where the first temple, according to the Quran, was built for mankind. It's supposed to be the Kaaba, a city where there is the place of Abraham, where he attempted to sacrifice his son. And according to the Quran, there are clear signs of the event. If you go to Mecca today, to the Haram near the Kaaba, there are 2 feet imprints, supposedly the foot imprints of Abraham, dating maybe 4,000 years. They are supposed to be the clear signs that the Quran refers to. There was a polytheistic population, according to the Islamic reading of the Quran. So these associators worshipped the temple, they had idols, and there was a pilgrimage there. But it was nonetheless, it was not 100% polytheistic city, because there were some Christians and Jews. Thereafter, Muhammad was sort of expelled from Mecca, and he went to Medina. So it's a hijra, the flight from Mecca to Medina. Medina was supposedly a Jewish city, but was also home to Christians and pagans. And there he made an alliance with Jews. So the alliance didn't last very long. Supposedly the Jews broke it, and there was harsh punishments. Some of them were killed and taken into slavery. But the important thing here is that there was an alliance between the Jews and the believers. During this time in Medina, because he had been expelled from Mecca, Muhammad was forbidden of accessing to Mecca, and also his followers too. There was a sort of forbidding of the pilgrimage to the first temple. The community of believers grew, and there were teachings from Muhammad following his revelation, religious teachings and exhortation focused on the eventual conquest of Mecca, which happened thereafter. There was some unsuccessful attempts to take control of the city, but around 630, a strong enough force was gathered that compelled the polytheist rulers of Mecca to open the city's gate, allowing the true believers to seize it without violence. This is also very important. The Kaaba was finally purified of associationist influence and restored to the true religions, and the true believers, or the Muslims, were able to return, settle in the city, and Islamicize the ancient practices of sacrifice and pilgrimage. So this is a sort of overview of Muhammad's story according to the Islamic reading of the Quran. But we see what we have here is a sort of framework or a scheme. We have a city where there was the first temple, the place of Abraham, that was ruled by associators. Associators are Christians, actually. We just saw that they were Christians. This looks very much like Jerusalem. Thereafter, we see that there was an alliance between the believers, the Arab believers, and some Jews in order to conquer this city, to conquer Jerusalem. And in 630, according to the Islamic narrative, the Mecca was taken without violence. In 638, Jerusalem was taken without violence. The Christian rulers of Jerusalem
on that point, there's, for instance,
opened the city's gate.
Yeah. on that point, there's some other parallels. Like take for
Mhm,
instance the idea of Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey,
mhm.
very humbly. You look at some of the, I mean, going from the literal to the figurative to the allegorical and so on, and because the story seems to be meander between all of these somewhere. And
Mhm.
you have Muhammad entering Jerusalem one night on a flying donkey. So he does one better, and you'll find there are other parallels as well within the Quranic
There
narrative.
are many parallels. There is also Umar ibn al-Khattab, according to the Islamic narrative, entering Jerusalem on a donkey,
Yeah,
same as Jesus.
and the Mecca
And
story
he
though.
sort of fulfills the biblical prophecy. He is the Messiah himself then.
No, he is in the Sira. He is most explicitly divine.
He is divine.
He's a god in the Sira. He is Jesus. He is divine in the Sira. That much is clear. But the Islamic narrative also contradicts itself completely because it states that Hagar was kicked out by Sarah because Ishmael was abusing and tried to kill.
Well, this doesn't make sense. All the
Yeah,
story about
yeah, I
Abraham
know. But
being
then
in
they get
Mecca
to
is
Arabia. They get to
ludicrous.
where Mecca is. There's no well. There's no water. There's no
Yeah.
city. They run around on the hills. But it's the oldest temple in the world. It's the oldest city in the world. It's been settled since millennia. But she gets there. There's nothing. So it doesn't make sense. It contradicts its own narrative. It
It makes
contradicts the
sense
Quran.
within the Islamic narrative because it gives legitimacy to the idea of Mecca and not Jerusalem being the genuine place of Abraham. That's what's at stake here. You see how the Islamic narrative in this frame or the scheme I just presented
Mm-hmm.
closely mirrors actual history.
Yes. Yeah, it's like an
This is
allegory
how it
of the.
was written, how it was fabricated. There was something historical. There was the attempt of an alliance of Jews and Arab believers to take Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, which they did. And this historical memory was distorted into the Islamic narrative,
Yeah.
forming the story of Muhammad
Or
being born
creatively,
in a polytheistic
deliberately
city,
transformed.
transformed,
So.
distorted. But when you look at
Yeah.
the Islamic narrative, and that's what's interesting, you see
Mm-hmm.
there are many people who want to engage Islam and who say the Islamic narrative isn't worth a thing. We have to get rid of everything. Actually, when you engage the Islamic narrative with a critical mind and with the scientific method, you
Mm-hmm.
can get some things. You can
Right.
understand how, during the Abbasid times, they fabricated it. And you get to understand also that if they had to fabricate the narrative, it's because it did not exist beforehand.
Right. I want to mention one more thing, which is a little off topic, on topic. If I can just show something.
Mhm.
This is some work that I did some time back in the monotheism. And there was a great deal of scholarly work done in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on that's been largely forgotten or ignored, let's say conveniently ignored. And this is about megaliths and the Kaaba. And this is from archaeologists working in that time. And their work, people kind of don't want to talk about it. But the Kaaba, for instance, the major axis of the Kaaba is aligned to the rising of Canopus at the 1st century AD. It is precisely aligned towards the southernmost setting position of the moon at the winter solstice, over the hills to the southwest of Mecca. Roughly every 19, that number is important in Islam, years, the crescent moon sets at the spot of the horizon visible along the southeast side of the Kaaba. This lunar alignment is also found in many megalithic sites in Europe. Now this goes on. I'm not going to go do the whole thing, but they speak of meteorological and astronomical meanings within the structure of the Kaaba as a physical structure. Here you've got, for instance, the handle of the plow, the three stars, the sunrise, rising point of Canopus, winter sunset, alignment with wind, alignment with stars, and almost like a solar calendar. So there's a megalithic aspect to the Kaaba as well, which has long been explored. So yeah, so this goes back as well. So there's these earlier influences, and then you've got this layers that come on later as culture changes, as religions change. They've been adapting, but there are things about this that are there if one looks. Just thought I'd throw that out and just add it there. That there are things here that.
Well. Do you want my opinion on this?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know if the story exists in English, but I'm sure if you shoot an arrow against the wall and plong, the arrow goes like this, and thereafter you draw the target around the arrow, you will say to everybody, yeah, look, I've done a bullseye. Yeah. This is a bit like this. You look at what the building is pointing, you find connections. Any connections is viable. Any connection can be useful. Yeah, it relates to the number 19 and so on. But it's exactly the way that some Islamic scholars do when they try to find scientific miracles in the Quran. Yeah. It's all about inventing stories. And besides, I have another point, Lloyd. Mm-hmm. The article was co-written by a very interesting scholar. Gerald Outing is someone respectable. But David King is a fraud. He is a fraud. He is being financed by some Muslim interests. He is on a mission to debunk Dan Gibson with fallacious claims, for example. And there's something about him that is very sad. It's the kind of scholar you were, talking. We were talking at the beginning of the presentation. He's someone who has built his whole career. He's very old now. He's over 70, 75. He has built his own career on the Islamic narrative. And everything crumbles now that Dan Gibson has proven that there was no mosque pointing to Mecca up until the 8th century. And he cannot stand it. He had to admit it in his writings, but he cannot stand it. And so he tries everything. He shoots every arrow at Dan Gibson.
But I think that article goes back, some of these articles go back decades. So some of the stuff I saw goes back decades. And I mean, for instance, just as one example, there's this. These are, and there's just more and more of these being discovered, and some of them are of greater and greater sophistication. So there's lots of odd influences that may be relevant and may have a role to play, or things that need to be interpreted. Yeah. In the context of Saudi Arabia. This is in Saudi Arabia, not Petra, for instance.
This is Alula. Hegra, Madain Saleh. Alula Rock. So the city is Madain Saleh, and it's also called in Latin Hegra.
So just that there's
influences. Robert Kerr did a presentation. I don't remember whether it was in the one you referenced. At least I saw him when he did this for our French organization. He showed us the map, the plan, the blueprint of the Kaaba. So it's not only a cube. There is a cube, but there is also a sort of balcony, a sort of hemispheric balcony, like an arc of circle, a bit of circle. And when you look at it, this square and the balcony like this, it looks very much like a Christian basilic, a big Christian church. And there is something about this balcony that is, there is a Christian influence there. The architects who did this had something Christian in mind. But you see, the problem we have is that the Kaaba we see today is not the Kaaba from the 8th century. It has been destroyed, leveled up to the ground,
multiple times,
bare rock, and it has been rebuilt several times. And since the Saudis took over Arabia and took over the holy sites, they are constantly maintaining the Kaaba, changing the stones, changing the stuff, and so the construction there is today is not very ancient.
Is a fiction. I mean, it's an ugly construction. It's really just it's cinder block. It's ugly. It's nothing special.
The blocks.
It's basically it's cinder block. It's an
Yeah.
ugly, disgusting construction covered with the hijab.
Without the hijab, without this black veil, it will be very. It won't be very appealing. And there are some videos that have been taken into the building, from within the building, which is empty. There are some chandeliers and lights hanging from the ceiling. And there is something there was a video that David Wood put up on his former channel. I don't know whether it exists anymore. It was very, very funny because he took this video of the inside of the Kaaba. He put himself towards a green screen, and he put himself into the Kaaba, and he made a video from inside the Kaaba. It was very, very funny.
Yeah, I've got some photos of the Kaaba. I'm trying to find them, but I don't think I'll get them in time. I'm not seeing them in my list because to show people that would be very interesting to see just how modern, how new, how it's just an ugly structure. Yeah,
I have a picture of the veil being unveiled by a very strong gush of wind.
Yes.
And you see the ugly structure behind, and it's very. You see, without the black veil, there is something about this veil. It's like Batman and his mask. Without the mask, he's nobody. You have to put a mask on the construction, on the building.
Right here, one of these.
Exactly, this one.
I have several like this. I just don't have them all right now, but this is, and yeah.
And it looks like cinder blocks, I agree.
And there was a door here.
Those are not cinder blocks, of course, but
yeah,
there was a door. There was a door that had been closed.
It's see the lintel here?
Yeah, with a lintel. The lintel and the place for a door. And there is another door on the other side.
Around the corner here. Yeah. And
oh no, don't lick the black stone. Oh,
definitely not pagan idolatry. Definitely not idolatry.
Oh no, please don't lick the black stone.
Yeah, definitely not worshipping a stone. Definitely not a pagan practice that was practiced before Islam. Definitely not. Clearly not. I mean, don't you lick your crucifix every morning, Odon? Isn't that standard Christian practice?
I lick my Bible. I lick everything I can lick.
I mean, isn't that something Christians do? Don't we do that? We lick our crucifixes. We run to the church and we lick the walls. Don't we do that?
Yeah, maybe when I was 1 year or 2 years old, I tried to lick everything I had at hand. But this is what toddlers do.
That's what babies do, exactly. So yeah,
grown men, and especially you don't lick the black stones. There are hundreds of thousands of dirty hands that try to touch it, and it's the same thing as licking the bar in the subway.
Yeah. I mean, this is devotion. This is shit. This is devotion to an inanimate object. This is devotion, deep devotion to.
There can be devotions to statues or objects, relics, and so on.
But this is worship.
I understand, but there has to be a meaning beyond the statue, beyond the object, beyond the, I don't know, the relic. What's the meaning, even in Islam, of the black stone?
And by the way, here are the
Really?
three cranes. Here are the three cranes. Right in the back there, you can see the three cranes from the Quran, from the satanic verses.
The cranes, the high-flying deities.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So next week we'll have a presentation and we'll unpack this from the start, right from page 1.
We'll unpack the issue of the protagonist in the Quran, with lots of Quranic references, because this is what we have to look at. But for people who want to take some advance, they can look at my book. I have I don't have such a detailed presentation in my book, but I have a whole part on Quranic studies at the end, and the PDF version of the book is freely available on my website. So don't hesitate.
Yeah. Also, by the way, you mentioned David King, and I read about that not that long ago. But this paper that I showed, I think, occurs long before, and it's not an Islam-friendly paper. So it's interesting that at that time, this paper was not to the benefit of Islam. So maybe he's reversed his position since, but this is definitely not complimentary.
He's not an Islam apologist, huh? You have to to make the distinction. No, it was just about slandering Dan Gibson, and for this,
someone mentioned
several Islamic websites, supposedly academic Islamic website, that welcome King's papers. Slandering, there is no other word, slandering Dan Gibson.
Dan Gibson. Okay. Yeah. I mean, someone mentioned Red Judaism earlier, and Red Judaism has said some very interesting, unkind things about me. So apparently, based on my previous role in the Middle East, I'm a terrorist, spy, etc. Doing bad things, whatever. So yeah, people say things. So yeah, Odon, thank you. That was interesting. I mean, an interesting overview, an interesting thesis. Yeah, because there's so much confusion. There is so much confusion, and I mean, this is a mess, and to unravel it is not easy. Certainly not easy. And Hussein Mashni, I saw you. We should make a plan. Let's talk maybe next month. Because it's been a while since we've chatted. So let's do something, Hussein. Yeah, so Odon, for last word to you, and thank you to the audience. Thank you for all the support. Really appreciate it. And like, share, subscribe. Odon's links, I've been posting those. You can see The Great Secret of Islam. You can get a copy of the book there, or buy it on Amazon and support Odon that way. And we're both on X. And be like John Cena. Follow me on X. Odon, last word.
Last word. There is nothing secret that won't be uncovered. It's a quotation from the Gospels, but I know it in French, and I just translated it in my mind. And I think that's what we are witnessing right now. A time of revelations, a time of unveiling, uncovering.
Right.
This is very, very exciting.
Yeah, so, no, definitely.
See you next week for more unveiling and uncovering. Lloyd,
no, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Much appreciated, everyone. Thank you. God bless.